The Philadelphia Phillies just spent $313 million to prove that money can't buy you a championship. And they're about to show every other franchise in baseball exactly what not to do. Think about this for a second. The third highest payroll in Major League Baseball. A roster loaded with All-Stars and former MVPs. And what do they have to show for it? A first-round playoff exit to a Mets team that spent $60 million less than them. But here's the thing. This isn't just about one disappointing season. The Phillies have created a blueprint for failure that every other team should study. Because of what they've done is worse than just wasting money. They've built a roster that can't win now, can't improve later, and can't even rebuild when this experiment inevitably falls apart. I'm going to break down exactly how Dave Dombrowski and the Phillies front office have constructed what might be the most expensive dead-end roster in baseball history. And if you're a fan of any other team, you should pay attention, because the mistakes Philadelphia is making right now are the same ones that have destroyed championship windows for decades. Now, I've been covering roster construction and baseball economics for years, and I want to be clear about something up front. This isn't about hating on the Phillies or their fans. Philadelphia deserves better than this. This is about understanding how a franchise with every advantage, money, market size, passionate fan base, can still get it completely wrong. The Phillies are entering 2025 with a roster that looks impressive on paper, but is fundamentally broken in ways that most people don't see. And the scariest part? There's no way out. They're trapped in a cycle that's going to get worse before it gets better. So let's dive into exactly how they got here and why every other team in baseball should be taking notes on what not to do. Let's start with the most obvious problem: the money. But not in the way you think. The Phillies' $313 million payroll isn't just expensive. It's strategically catastrophic. They're not just in the luxury tax. They're in the fourth tier, paying a 110% penalty on every dollar over the threshold. That means they're paying over $22 million in luxury tax penalties before they even think about adding a single player. But here's what most people miss. The luxury tax isn't really about the money. It's about the opportunity cost. When you're in the fourth tier, you lose draft picks. Your first-round pick gets moved back 10 spots. You can't sign certain international free agents. You're handcuffed in ways that go far beyond just writing bigger checks. Compare this to how the Dodgers operate. Yes, they're spending big money, but they're smart about it. They cycle in and out of the luxury tax. They take penalties when it makes sense, then reset when they need flexibility. The Phillies? They're trapped. They can't add meaningful pieces without massive penalties, and they can't shed salary because everyone's locked into long-term deals. Here's the belief-breaking point that most fans don't understand. The conventional wisdom says you have to spend money to win championships, but that's not actually true. What you need is to spend money efficiently. The luxury tax isn't just a financial penalty, it's a competitive penalty. And the Phillies have built themselves into a corner where they're paying maximum penalties for minimum flexibility. Think about it this way. The Phillies are like someone who maxed out their credit cards to buy a house they can't afford. And now they can't even buy groceries. They've got all this expensive talent, but they can't improve the roster around it. But the luxury tax is just the symptom. The real disease is how they built their roster in the first place. Here's where the Phillies' strategy gets problematic. They built their entire championship window around players who are already on the wrong side of 30. Zack Wheeler is 35. Trea Turner is 32. Bryce Harper is 32. Kyle Schwarber is 32. These aren't young players entering their prime. These are veterans who are either at their peak or already declining. And the Phillies have committed hundreds of millions of dollars to them through their late 30s. Now, I know what you're thinking. These are great players. Harper's an MVP. Wheeler's a Cy Young candidate. Turner's an All-Star. And you're right, but here's the problem. Championship teams don't just need great players. They need great players at the right cost. Look at Nick Castellanos. The Phillies are paying him $20 million a year through 2027. In 2024, he hit .254 with a 710 OPS. That's not terrible, but that's not $20 million good. And he's only going to get older and more expensive. Compare this to how successful teams operate. The Orioles built their contender around young, cost-controlled players like Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman. The Astros mixed expensive veterans like Altuve with cheap young talent like Hunter Brown. Championship teams need about 40% of their roster value to come from players making under $10 million. The Phillies get maybe 15%. Here's the belief-breaking point. The conventional wisdom says you should sign your stars to long-term deals for security and stability. But that's backwards thinking. Long-term deals to aging players don't create security. They create inflexibility when you need it most. Think about the 2023 Rangers. They won the World Series with a mix of expensive veterans and cheap young players. Corey Seager and Marcus Semien were their big signings, but they were supported by guys like Evan Carter and Josh Jung making league minimum. The Phillies can't do that because they've committed all their money to players who are already expensive and getting more expensive every year. And when you don't have young, cheap talent, you can't make the trades that championship teams need to make. This is where Dave Dombrowski's philosophy really shows its flaws. He traded away the Phillies' future for a present that isn't even working. Over the past 4 years, the Phillies have systematically gutted their farm system. They traded prospects for Carlos Estevez, for Austin Hayes, for Tanner Banks. None of these moves were terrible in isolation, but together they've left the cupboard completely bare. Right now, the Phillies have maybe 3 legitimate prospects in their entire system: Andrew Painter, Justin Crawford, and Starlin Caba. That's it. Compare that to the Dodgers, who just traded for Jack Flaherty and Tommy Edman at the deadline because they had the prospect depth to make those deals. The Phillies couldn't upgrade at the deadline because they had nothing to trade. Here's a perfect example of how this hurts them. In 2024, the Phillies desperately needed bullpen help. Their relief pitching was a disaster all season, but they couldn't make a meaningful trade because they didn't have the prospects to get a quality reliever. So they stood pat, and their bullpen cost them in the playoffs. Meanwhile, the Dodgers were able to add multiple pieces because they had built up their farm system. They could afford to trade prospects because they had depth. The Phillies can't afford to trade prospects because they don't have any. But here's the belief-breaking point that most people miss. The conventional wisdom says you should trade prospects for proven players when your championship window is open. But that's only true if you have enough prospects to trade. Championship teams need prospect depth, not just for the future, but for in-season upgrades. You can't win a championship with just your opening day roster. Every World Series winner in the past decade has made significant in-season additions. The Phillies can't do that anymore because they've mortgaged their future for a present that isn't delivering. Think about it this way. The Phillies are like a poker player who went all in with a decent hand, but now they're out of chips and can't bet on the next hand. They're stuck with what they have, and what they have isn't good enough. But even if they had the prospects to trade, their roster construction makes it impossible to identify what they actually need. Here's where the Phillies' problems get really complicated. They've created a roster where every position is both set and broken at the same time. Take Nick Castellanos again. He's making $20 million to play right field, but he's not good at playing right field. His defense is below average, his arm is weak, and he's only getting older. But the Phillies can't bench him because he's making too much money. They can't trade him because his contract is too big and he has limited no-trade protection. And they can't move him to another position because he can't play anywhere else. Compare this to how the Dodgers operate. They move Mookie Betts from right field to shortstop to second base based on what the team needed. The Astros have moved Alex Bregman all over the infield. Championship teams need positional flexibility to maximize their talent. The Phillies have the opposite. They have expensive players locked into positions where they're declining, and they can't move pieces around because of contracts and sunk costs. Trea Turner is locked into shortstop even though his defense has declined. Kyle Schwarber is locked into designated hitter even though they might need more flexibility. Here's a perfect example of how this hurts them. In 2024, the Phillies had one of the worst outfield defenses in baseball, but they couldn't fix it because Castellanos, Marsh, and Schwarber were all locked into their roles. They couldn't bring up a prospect because there was no room. They couldn't make a trade because they had no flexibility. The belief breaking point here is crucial. The conventional wisdom says you should lock up your core players at their natural positions for stability. But that's backwards thinking. The best rosters are built like puzzles, not like statues. You need to be able to move pieces around based on matchups, injuries, and performance. Championship teams adapt. The Phillies can't adapt because they built a roster that's completely inflexible. And that inflexibility is about to get much worse. All of this leads to the ultimate problem that will define the Phillies' future. Here's the scariest part about the Phillies situation. Their championship window isn't just closing, it already closed. They just don't know it yet. From 2025 to 2027, the Phillies are locked into their current core with virtually no flexibility. They can't rebuild because they have no prospects. They can't retool because they have no salary flexibility. And they can't significantly upgrade because they have no trade assets. Meanwhile, every other contender in the National League is getting better. The Braves are getting healthy. The Mets are spending intelligently. The Dodgers are the Dodgers. The Phillies are standing still while everyone else is moving forward. This is exactly what happened to the Red Sox under Dave Dombrowski from 2017 to 2019. Same philosophy, same approach, same result. They won a World Series in 2018, but by 2019 they were already declining, and by 2020 they were rebuilding. The window closed faster than anyone expected because they had no flexibility to adapt. The Phillies are following the exact same playbook. They've mortgaged their future for a present that delivered one World Series appearance and 3 straight playoff disappointments. And now they're stuck. Here's the final belief-breaking point. The conventional wisdom says championship windows last 4 to 5 years if you manage them properly. But that's not true. Windows close when you can't adapt to changing circumstances. The Phillies' window isn't closing. It's already closed. They just haven't admitted it yet. Think about successful franchises over the past decade. The Giants, the Royals, the Cubs, the Red Sox, the Nationals, the Braves, the Dodgers, the Rangers. What do they all have in common? They balanced present and future. They made big moves when it made sense, but they never mortgaged everything for one shot. The Phillies did the opposite. They mortgaged both their present and their future, and now they have neither. The Philadelphia Phillies are a cautionary tale, not a blueprint. They're showing every other team in baseball exactly how not to build a championship contender. They've created the most expensive dead-end roster in baseball, and there's no easy way out. Other teams should study this situation carefully. The Orioles, the Guardians, the Brewers, these teams are building the right way. They're balancing present and future, developing young talent while adding strategic veteran pieces. What do you think? Are there other teams making similar mistakes to the Phillies? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into roster construction and what separates championship teams from pretenders, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Next week, we're going to flip the script and break down which teams are actually built to win in 2025. Trust me, the teams that are doing it right are not the ones you'd expect. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.